Whether you're into crawling over rocks, hitting the beach, or just looking cool, this thing has been a vibe since the mid-60s. It's had its highs, its lows, and one of the most hyped-up comebacks in recent history. So, let's break down everything you need to know about the legendary Ford Bronco. Let's go back to 1965, because this is when the Bronco officially hit the scene, and they weren't just calling it a truck. They marketed it as an all-purpose vehicle. They were really pushing this idea of the Bronco as a lifestyle accessory, which is why they launched it with 3 distinct body styles. First, you had the Roadster, which was the Bronco in its rawest form. But as cool as it looked in the brochures, it was pretty impractical. So they actually killed it off after 1968 because nobody was buying it. Then you had the Sports Utility, which was basically a little half-cab pickup. And finally there was the Wagon. This was the volume seller and the direct ancestor to the SUVs we drive today. When it first launched, the powertrain was honestly pretty agricultural. The only engine you could get was a 170 cubic inch inline-6 pulled from the Falcon, making about 105 horsepower. Now, to be fair, they did beef it up for the trails, so it wouldn't struggle when you were at a crazy angle on a hill. But then, in March of '66, Ford absolutely dropped the mic. While the Jeep and International were still messing around with 4 bangers and weak 6 cylinders, Ford slapped the 289 cubic inch V8 on the menu. Suddenly, the Bronco wasn't just a piece of farm equipment. It was a legitimate performance machine. And as time went on, the engines just kept evolving. And they didn't stop there. They started styling it up too. The real boss move was the Ranger package in 1973. It was a huge step in turning the Bronco from a basic tin box into a premium lifestyle rig. Honestly, the Bronco's reputation for being bulletproof was forged right in the deserts of Baja. There was this legendary builder, Bill Strop, who figured out that the Bronco's coil spring front suspension was way better for high speeds than the leaf springs everyone else was using. So he teams up with Parnelli Jones, and they build the Big Ollie. And it just crushed the competition, winning the Baja 1000 in '71 and '72. Ford and Strop knew they had something special, so they decided to cash in with the Baja Bronco, which ran from 1971 to 1975. They're super rare, so if you ever spot one in the wild, you are looking at one of the most collectible 4x4s on the planet. Let's take a trip back to the early '70s, because the whole truck scene was shifting fast. Chevy just dropped the K5 Blazer in '69, and honestly, it was a game changer. It was absolutely crushing the Bronco in sales, and Ford knew they had to answer. So, when things finally calmed down after the oil crisis of 1973, Ford released the second-gen Bronco in 1978. We're talking a massive departure from the original. The wheelbase stretched by 12 inches, and it basically shared its front metal, chassis, and drivetrain with the F-Series pickup. With a bigger truck, you obviously need bigger engines. They retired the inline-6 and dropped in 2 massive V8 options. The standard was the 351 cubic inch, that's the 5.8 liter, but you could step up to the 400, the 6.6 liter, if you wanted more grunt. Now, you have to remember this was the emissions era, so horsepower was pretty strangled. The big 400 only made about 158 horses, but the torque was still there, putting out 276 pound-feet at just 2,000 RPM, which made this thing a beast for towing. Underneath, they kept the solid front axle with coil springs and radius arms, so it still had that amazing articulation the original was famous for, just on a much heavier-duty scale. And here's the crazy part. Despite all that fear about gas prices a few years earlier, the '78 Bronco was an absolute smash hit. There was so much pent-up demand that they sold over 77,000 units in the first year alone. That's nearly triple the best sales year the first generation ever had. Picture this. It's 1980, oil crisis is squeezing everyone at the pumps, and this is what the third-gen Bronco was born into. They kept the truck big. It still had that massive footprint, but they put it on a serious diet. They used lighter, high-strength steel and famously stamped holes right into the frame rails to shave pounds. They also smoothed out the styling just a touch to help it cut through the air. But let's be honest, it was still a brick, just a slightly more aerodynamic brick. But the real headline was underneath the front end, the twin traction beam, or TTB. Unlike a solid axle, where hitting a bump on the left side rocks the whole truck to the right, the TTB split the axle into two beams that pivoted in the center. This gave you independent wheel travel, which was a total game changer for ride quality. While the hardcore rock-crawling crowd wished for the simplicity of a solid axle, the TTB was actually a huge win for the average buyer who just wanted a comfortable daily driver. Under the hood, they tried to save you some gas money by bringing back the 300 cubic inch inline six. That engine is an absolute icon, tractor-like torque and basically unkillable, which is why fleet buyers loved it. You still had the 302 and 351 Windsor V8s. The big leap happened in 1985. That's when they finally gave it electronic fuel injection, so no more fighting with temperamental carburetors on cold mornings. You finally got reliable starts, a smooth idle, and way better efficiency. Now let's talk about the big refresh in 1987, because this is where the Bronco really started to feel like the modern truck we know and love. Ford basically synced it up with the 8th Gen F-150, and in the car community, it's known as the brick nose generation. It's not hard to see why. That front end is completely flat. Plus, they made rear anti-lock brakes standard, which was huge tech for a truck back in the day. But the real magic happened in 1988 when the whole engine lineup went digital. We're talking about the 300 inline six, the 302 V8, and the big 351 Windsor. All of them got electronic fuel injection. Honestly, this era was peak Bronco reliability. These powertrains could hit 100,000 miles without even breaking a sweat. For gearboxes, you had some solid options. The Mazda 5-speed manual for the lighter-duty stuff, or the heavy hitters like the C6 and E4OD automatics if you were running the bigger V8s. Towards the end of the run, they dropped some absolute gems to keep things interesting. In 1991, we got the Night Edition, which is just the ultimate early 90s vibe, all blacked out with these radical gradient stripes. But if you wanted to look classy, there was the Silver Anniversary Edition celebrating 25 years. This thing was a big deal because it was the first time you could get factory leather in a Bronco. It really showed that the Bronco was evolving from a rugged workhorse into a genuine luxury vehicle. Let's dive into the final chapter of the legendary old body style Bronco. This 5th gen launched in '92, and if you know these trucks, you know we call this the Aero Nose. Under the metal, it was basically the same truck we knew and loved, but they had to get serious about safety to keep it on the road. They actually modified the frame rails for crumple zones and finally gave the rear passengers 3-point seatbelts. Thanks to new safety laws about roof strength and brake lights, Ford stopped telling people how to take the roof off in the manual, basically discouraging you from doing it without technically saying you couldn't. Now, you can't talk about this truck without talking about June 17, 1994. That's when a white 93 XLT became arguably the most recognizable vehicle on the planet. We all remember seeing Al Cowlings driving OJ on that low-speed chase with 95 million people glued to their TVs. There's this huge myth that the OJ scandal is what killed the Bronco, but the numbers tell a totally different story. That notoriety actually sparked a sales renaissance. Sales jumped by over 7,000 units the following year because everyone wanted what they saw on TV. But ultimately, the two-door giant was doomed anyway. The market was shifting hard toward four-door family haulers like the Explorer and Grand Cherokee. So, in 1996, the very last Bronco left the Michigan factory, making way for the Ford Expedition. That thing could seat 9 people and sold like hotcakes, seeming to put the Bronco name to rest forever. So, after an agonizing 25-year wait, Ford finally decided to bring the Bronco back. And honestly, they understood the assignment. Unlike Chevy, who kind of broke our hearts by turning the Blazer into a generic crossover, Ford knew that if they brought back the Bronco, it had to be the real deal. They literally did 3D scanning of the original 1966 Bronco to make sure they nailed those retro proportions and that classic stance. Now, sad news for the muscle car crowd, the V8 didn't make the comeback. Instead, they went all in on their EcoBoost turbo tech. You've got the 2.3-liter inline-4 putting out 300 horsepower and the 2.7-liter twin-turbo V6 pushing 330 horses and 415 pound-feet of torque. If you step up to the Raptor, you get that monster 3-liter V6 making over 400 horses. But the transmission situation is where it gets really interesting. You've got the 10-speed auto, which is great for towing and daily driving, but they also gave us a 7-speed manual on the 2.3-liter engine. It's actually a 6-speed with a dedicated crawler gear located below first. When you pair that with the transfer case, you get a crawl ratio of nearly 95-1, which gives you insane control. If you want to go fast in the desert, though, you have to talk about the Bronco Raptor. This thing is built to handle jumps, literally. The frame is reinforced with jounce bumpers and shock towers, and the whole truck is almost 10 inches wider. But if you're more into history than airtime, there's the Heritage Limited Edition. It's a tribute to the old Baja Broncos, and it's super cool because it's a 2-door only setup, which is rare for high trims. It comes with an upgraded suspension and a 2.7-liter V6, all wrapped in those classic liveries like Code Orange or Atlas Blue. It's basically an instant factory collectible,